good morning, everyone. Welcome to our September Community Planner Forum meeting. For those that haven't met me before, I'm Sandy Misowitz with the Capital District Transportation Committee. Hopefully you can see my screen at this point with our opening slide. If you're new to the Planner Forum, this group meets quarterly, and we really are a forum to share information about best practices in planning, activities going on in the capital region regarding planning, solicitations for planning assistance, and really it's just an informational exchange for all of us to learn from each other. Today's agenda, and of course my screen froze, there it goes. Today we're going to have a presentation from Todd Fabozzi, who's the Director of Sustainability at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. He's going to describe and discuss the Capital District Atlas, describe some of the changes that we're seeing in land use and other things in the region. We'll also have a discussion about our newly adopted New Vision's 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, focusing specifically on the land use vision and how we can all work together to potentially help implement that land use vision. Then we'll do some group discussion on some planning updates from not only CDTC, but other state, regional, local partners. Some training and workshops that are coming up in the coming months. And also the next meeting date, of course. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Todd, who may be rejoining, looking at my list here. I will stop sharing my screen. Todd.
Hey, Sandy. I'll stall while Todd's connected.
Okay, thank you.
A brief intro to the Capital Region Atlas.
Thanks, Mark.
Capital Region Atlas was the brainchild of Todd back in, I believe, the late 90s and early 2000s. And is really a repository for a variety of maps that help us understand better who we are as a region, both demographically, socioeconomically, and how we've decided to live across the landscape, whether that's the built environment, our transportation networks, or our environmental resources. And this updated version includes an updated series of maps that Mr. Fabozzi has updated that, again, take the story that he told back in the 90s and early 2000s and brings them into the 2020s. So the Atlas is a document and as an online resource is available to local governments and other policymakers interested in learning more about our region. And without any further ado, I'll introduce Todd Fabozzi, Director of Sustainability at the Capital District Regional Planning Commission.
Great, it's up, Todd.
Thank you. So let me just start by giving some background as to the origin of the Capital Region Atlas, because it really goes back to over 20 years ago. Actually, when I was first hired at CDTC, which is actually now more like 24 years ago, I started to develop the first regional GIS system for the commission, and one of the products of that was to develop a regional atlas. So this goes back to, I think around 1998, we put this out, and it was the first digital atlas that was put out by CDRPC. CDRPC had done mapping throughout its history, but it was all hand mapping. We used to have a couple of cartographers on staff. And this was the first digital product. And one of the ideas behind it is that we have a view of the entire region. And that's why I particularly like these satellite images, because without even the regional boundaries, you can see the municipal boundaries, you can get a pattern of development that really is at a different scale than most people usually consider the region or think about it. So it allows communities to kind of see their place in the region and how they fit in the bigger picture. And so this is in a way kind of the connecting the dots. So we developed a whole series of different maps. I'm not going to go through all those, but I just wanted to point out that this was the starting point then for creating a digital atlas in which we continue to update over the years. So every time that we got new information from the census or there was new information out that seemed worthy of a whole update, we would create new maps and put them on our website, cdrpc.org, for anyone to access. And one of the great values, I believe, of not only just seeing the region, but the value of these maps is that you can utilize them, for example, in reports, you can utilize them in PowerPoint presentations, grant applications, and there's really no other place that I've ever seen in which you can get cartographically ready maps of the big picture of the four-county capital region with just this kind of a view and not like an interactive map or something like that that's not cartographically ready. So this is one of the atlas maps, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to be able to just share some kind of key maps and just be able to look at the times. Now, I just got a text that distracted me a little bit that said I'm choppy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're very choppy, like very staticky. We can just hear you.
Okay, unfortunately. I don't know what's going on here. I mean, I'm on my phone here. I can attempt to try to just keep turning off the Wi-Fi, but I think I better just keep going here and we'll just have to make do with the way things are.
Okay.
Multiple difficulties, I guess, here today. So this is a land cover map of the capital region. So this gives a big picture view of the actual land cover, not quite land use, but it does show pretty clearly then the development patterns of the capital region. And this is an extract from that same kind of a data set in which you have just the impervious surface. And I should point out that one of the other values of this data is to be able to utilize this data for other projects, to be able to look at, for example, if you were doing a watershed plan in your community, to be able to use this kind of information for an extract of this information for some local mapping. So we do have our technical assistance program with CDTC, and we utilize a lot of this data for mapping for that program. But this shows the impervious areas within the region. We have data that's from tax parcel information in which we create land use maps as an example. So this is a land use map of the whole region. This is an extract where we can start to look at just different pieces of land use, such as commercial land uses. So you get a look at the patterns of commercial development. Particularly, you can see the development along the highways, particular highways, and more strict highway commercial development. It's an extract of the parcel data of just residential parcels. So this looks at the residential development from a 10-year period. And you get a snapshot then of the kind of development that's going on and where it's going on in terms of residential patterns. This is an extract from parcel data of fuel use. And we utilize this for our clean heating and cooling campaign, in which we promote air source and ground source heat pumps as a more efficient way to heat and cool your home. So we have a campaign that we're running, where we're promoting this technology. And this is just an opportunity map, really, of all of the properties that are utilizing fuel oil. There's over 60,000 of them that are using fuel oil, which is much dirtier and much more expensive than heat pumps. So these are opportunity areas for heat pumps. This is a greenhouse gas emissions map that we get from an inventory that was done based on 2010 data. We'd like to update this information. We don't have a funding source right now to do a whole new inventory, but we're hoping to do one soon. But this is interesting information as well because it shows the difference in communities greenhouse gas emissions, and you can see a close correlation with the more urban an area is, the more built up it is, the lower its greenhouse gas emissions are per capita. And that has a lot to do with its walkability, its transit orientation, and also its shared walls and multiple floors for heating. We have a series of maps that are based on environmental characteristics such as wetlands and flood zones and hydrography and watershed boundaries and elevation. We have LiDAR data where we can look at elevation maps of the region in a particular small areas. So then one of the key data sources is census data and thematic mapping, in which we do comparisons of patterns across the region based primarily on census tracts. So this is a population density map based on tracts. And the whole idea behind thematic maps is that they are comparative and you're looking at patterns. So this is a way to look at patterns across the region. So they're not really, the idea isn't to look up something specific, it's to look at comparisons across the area. Population change is one of those things we look at over time, and this is a key dynamic that I think everyone's pretty conscious of, is when you look at this period, a 50-year period of population change, the areas that have grown have been suburban primarily, except for Saratoga Springs, and the areas that have lost population in red are the urban city, the older cities. And you can see the proportion of either loss or gain through this map, so that I think this is one of the big dynamics that we often wrestle with in terms of development. This is a population map that looks at change just over the last census decade, based on estimates. And it's I suppose, a troubling map on some levels, because it's basically showing a loss in population once again in the cities of Albany, Schenectady, and Troy, and some other smaller towns as well are losing population. And overall, the region is not really growing. That the region is only projected to increase by about, so far, and this is to 2018, a little over 13,000 people. So maybe it will be 15,000 people, maybe up to 17,000 at most, probably at the end of the decade. So that's a much smaller number than the previous census decade, which was around over 40,000 people. So we recall had done a lot of analysis about potential hyper growth based on that plant and all these different scenarios if this region really took off because of that. And in fact, the opposite happened, and we're actually growing much lower in population, much less rate of population growth than previously.
Hey Todd, I hate to interrupt. Can you hold the phone a little closer? I think that might help.
Okay, got it pretty close. Let me see something here. Okay, how's that?
It's a little better, I think. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. For some reason, I'm getting feedback, and I think it's because of the microphone on the computer. Let's see, is that better?
It sounds a little better. Keep on talking so we can hear some more.
Let me just try something really quick and mute it and see if my speaker's again working. Can you hear me? You can. All right. Well, if that's the case, then I'm going to just go through my computer. So let me just put my phone. I'm afraid to turn it off and have to start through that whole process again. I'll put my phone in the other room so I'm not getting feedback here. All right, let's see if we can finally get through this. So residential building permits, we have median household income as an example. And this is the dynamic if we're going to talk about growth patterns. Not only has there been a shift to the suburbs and a decline in the cities, but there's been an economic shift because of the growth of the suburbs as higher income areas, and essentially the cities becoming over time more and more lower income areas. So you can see that pattern with the darker green are the higher income, below the lighter color or the white are the lowest income areas. You can also look at that same phenomenon based on poverty. see the high concentration of poverty in urban areas, and then you can also see the rural poverty that also exists in our region. When you look at the concentration of the non-white, non-Hispanic population, so you're looking at the minority population, I'm sorry, not non-Hispanic, but the non-white population, you're looking at a concentration in the same areas where most of the poverty is, at least the urban poverty. So we have a correlation between poverty and between where the minority population lives. If you look at the Black population in the region, it's pretty highly segregated and concentrated in certain areas of Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. When you look at immigration, and so these are people that did not live in the country until 2010, you can see where those people are focusing their residence in the urban areas, primarily, though some in the suburbs. And the total immigration up to 2018, from 2010 to 2018, was over 17,000 people. So really what this says is if it wasn't for immigration in the capital region, we would not be growing at all. We would actually be losing population in the capital region if it wasn't for immigration. So this is a really important phenomenon as well. We can look at things like educational attainment and the distribution of where people have bachelor's degrees, and you see that more dominant in the suburbs and some of the rural towns. You can look at housing value through these maps, and you can see the variation in the value of housing, which is actually pretty correlated as well with the year that the housing was built. So this is a map of the year housing was built, and you can see the shift from up into Saratoga County in terms of the housing, newer housing compared to older housing. This is an extract of just rental housing, and you can see where the concentration of rental housing is. 1 dot equals 50 units of rental housing. And this is based on tracts. And then this is apartments based on parcel data, just another way to look at similar information. So these show the actual apartment buildings and where they're located. And we see concentration in the urban areas. We also see a fair amount of isolated apartment buildings in suburban areas, which raises some issues about connectivity and about the concentration of a lot of people in a pod disconnected from anything else, so auto-oriented in its nature. When we look at vacant housing, it's highly concentrated in the urban areas. So now we're starting to see a correlation between the urban areas being the lower income areas, the concentration of minority population, and also the concentration of vacant housing units. When we look at commuting patterns, so this is another extract of things we look at is the commuting patterns. We can see, so the darker the area, and in fact the darkest area, is over half the population commutes outside of the county in which they live. So you're seeing that we have a dynamic in which, of course, Albany being the state capital is attracting a lot of people to work in Albany, but not necessarily everyone who works there lives there. You can see that dynamic here. This is the percent of people who take public transit. So we can look at public transit and see, again, highly concentrated in the urban areas. When we look at another factor that drives transit use, and that is no vehicle households, you can see those households are concentrated as well in the urban areas where we do have good transit access. So that's just a look at and a sampling of the Atlas maps. And so I urge you to go to cdrpc.org and to look at all of them at your leisure, to be able to, again, if you are a community that wants to take advantage of our technical assistance program, we can use this data to help develop maps for your comprehensive plans or other kinds of analysis that you're doing. And feel free to copy versions of those, JPEG versions of those, and use them in reports and in presentations and in grant applications. But I also wanted to, and Sandy had asked that we have a little bit of a concentration or a conversation about the growth patterns and what they might mean in terms of just development in general in the capital region. And so I wanted to touch on a couple things really quickly here that were maybe a little different scale and not in the atlas, but lend themselves to thinking about it. So this is an older satellite map, but I show this because a number of years ago, when we first put out the atlas, we had done a change analysis using satellite information and it documented where that new growth went. And that was from 1986 to 1997. Then we developed further refined its land use types, and this led to a lot of discussions and presentations on patterns of growth. But we've looked at that over time, and we've come up with a lot of different ways to show the patterns of growth in the region. One of them is just to look at residential growth in 10-year increments. And so this is a 10-year snapshot of just residential growth, starting from 1945 to 54. And then I'll just click through these to 64, 74, 84, 94, 2004, 2015. And you can see the change over time in just residential growth. So it's pretty substantial and it's pretty dispersed. So then a few years back, maybe this was now 4 years ago, so we looked to update that change analysis by using parcel data and looking at a 20-year period of change. So we went back to 1995 to 2015, and we took an extract. So this is the entire parcel of residential development change. So what you see as an outline around here is the whole parcel boundary. And sometimes that's not the whole parcel. Single-family homes in the region over a 20-year period. And so just some of the statistics of that there were over 35,000 new homes built, a 20% increase during that 20-year period, and a 30% increase in the acres developed. So there were over 56,000 new acres developed. But when you look at the population change during that same 20-year period, there was only a 7% increase in population. So we were essentially just with residential development consuming land at over 5 times the rate of population growth. So Institute study noted a long time ago that this was probably out some 20 years ago as well, but they coined the term sprawl without growth. And in a way, that's what we continue to do here, at least when you look at this period. We see a lot more development in population increase. So we took that information and we created growth profiles for each of the communities, and hopefully communities are aware of this. These are all available on our website to download for each of the communities in the region and for the counties as a whole. And they're 4-page sheets in which we show some population and housing information, greenhouse gas emission information. We created land use maps for each of the communities based on this data, and we created an extract of just the single family development during that 20-year period, and then also took it one step further and said, for those developed areas during that 20-year period, those residential developed areas, let's just look at the new roads that were built as part of that development, and then also note if those roads have sidewalks or not. And so we have created, again, these maps for all of the communities for you to be able to check out. And so in this case, if you have either a green or a red line on the map, it shows that it's a new road. If it's red, it means it's a new road without a sidewalk. If it's green, it's a new road with a sidewalk. And so then to take this one step further, what I've done is taken those 20 years of residential development parcels and shown those in relation to CDTC sidewalk inventory. So this is a map that shows the sidewalk inventory of the region. And that is all of the sidewalks that existed a couple of years ago when this was done in relation to the parcels. And you can see very clearly that there's certainly a lack of sidewalks outside of the urban areas. And that there's a lot of residential growth going on, but it's not including sidewalks. And so in most cases, pretty auto-oriented. You can check out the details of these, and I'm not going to go through the whole region, but just gives you a snapshot of again, if there's a purple line, that means there's a sidewalk. And if there's a beige parcel, that means that's a new residential parcel built during the last 20 years. And you can see where there's a lot of areas in which there were no sidewalks put in. There's some where there were. You can, if you look, and I think this is something maybe to consider with CDTC's inventory. I think there are shared use paths, for example, that don't show up on the sidewalk inventory and probably should be added because they do function as sidewalks as well. But so that this maybe underrepresents a little bit of the connectivity, the pedestrian connectivity, but nonetheless, you can see the large lack of sidewalks as well. You can see stark contrast between, say, missed unions connectivity, the time period when it just seemed like at a certain point in the 50s or so, we stopped building sidewalks when we built residential developments. And so it seems to me we need to get back to building sidewalks. You can see examples where large residential developments outside Mechanical, there was no attempt to try to connect up to the sidewalk connections that existed in the city for that development right next to it. And here, this is lastly just a shot of this is Bethlehem, and you can see where Bethlehem has extended sidewalks through some of the residential developments to try to create some connectivity. And so when you look closely at, and this is not an atlas, but again, when you change scales then and you start to look at the particular residential developments and you look at these patterns, you can see a largely disconnected kind of pattern. I've tried to promulgate the idea of what I call the 3 C's. It's a different kind of 3 C's than they used to teach in the 60s in regional planning, but this is 3 C's that I call complex, compact, and connected. And to me, that's the essence of smart growth. Is if you have connectivity, if you have your development being somewhat compact, and those things kind of go together, of course, and then what I call complexity, which is also, I suppose, mixed use. You would use that term, but a complexity of opportunities to go to other things and connect to them besides just your house. Because you see such a disconnected pattern when you look at these residential developments. They're basically just pods that are not ever meant to be connected up. I mean, when you have all these cul-de-sacs and you have houses at the end, you can't really connect to them in any fashion. So they're kind of terminal and can't evolve. And when you see that throughout the region as you change scales and look at this kind of development, and so I think this is, in my opinion, a wasteful pattern of development. You're using a lot of land for not that many people, a lot of road infrastructure for not that many homes, and basically all these patterns are completely auto-oriented. They're not connected up to anything. They're not meant to connect up over time. And they really sit in isolation. So they do not really stand up in terms of sustainability because they're not really, they're the worst kind of development in terms of having low carbon emissions. And some can argue, well, this is okay because we can just connect it all up with electric vehicles and then there won't be carbon emissions from transportation. But this is still a very wasteful pattern regardless when it comes to land consumption, when it comes to infrastructure, road infrastructure, sewer water infrastructure, the more dispersed things are. And public health for that matter. When people can't get to anything, kids can't walk to school, and people can't get to anything except to take their car. So we see this throughout the region, and we've seen the conversation change. And in my view, talking about this stuff for 25 years, I think the conversation's changed. Years ago, when I started talking about these kind of things and pointing them out, I was told you can't say this stuff and don't, this is just the way it is. And now we say, well, we want to change this stuff, but I don't see a heck of a lot of change. I think we're getting some rebirth in the cities in certain areas, but I think a lot of the development in the suburbs is continuing in the pace to the way it's been for the last 30 or 40 years. So I'll stop there, and I think hopefully that sees the conversation about regional growth.
Oops. Thanks, Todd. Before we move on, does anybody have any specific questions for Todd? And thank you for your patience with the audio. We'll
for some reason this is not coming through, even though you can hear me, so I can hear you talking in the other room where my phone is. So let me grab my phone.
Okay. We'll be cleaning up the transcript of this presentation, so you'll be able to review the information that Todd presented. Any specific questions that anyone has at this point?
I've been seeing recent articles saying that now, because of COVID, that this kind of development is more attractive because it spaces people out. I'd like his comment. I don't agree, but you know, I've been seeing, you know, in various sources, articles saying that suburban development is, you know, the urban areas are emptying out to the suburbs in increasing numbers now because of COVID.
Well, I think one of the things we're seeing is people are wanting to walk and actually are walking and biking a lot more than I've seen anyway, anecdotally. And so I'm not sure I agree with all of that. I think we have conflicting things going on. We have the idea that we want to be somewhat dispersed, but in the same regard, we want to be able to walk and bike. And people still want to congregate. I mean, at the end of the day, when I live in Saratoga, and when I go look downtown, I don't really take part in it, but people are going out, they're sitting in the restaurants, and they want to be around other people, and I don't think that the pandemic is going to last forever. So I don't think we should be planning for that.
Any other questions for Todd? Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. Mark Castiglione posted in the chat the direct link to the atlas on CDRPC's website. So I would encourage you to copy and paste that into your browser to take a look at all of the maps that CDRPC created. And I'm sure if you have any specific questions about the data or trying to interpret the data, Todd and the team at CDRPC would be happy to answer them offline. Thank you very much, Todd. And Todd's presentation dovetails well into our next agenda item, which is the review of our regional transportation plan for New Visions. I will start sharing my screen and hopefully everyone can hear okay. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see my slides okay? All right, so as back in April, at our last two meetings ago, actually, of this group, we had a presentation on the overview of our entire New Visions Regional Transportation Plan at a very, very high level. We're not going to go into that level of detail today because there's too much in there, but I wanted to take some time, again, piggybacking off of Todd's presentation on the land use vision that New Visions is advocating for and how we collectively as a region can work towards implementation of that land use vision. And remember, our New Visions plan extends out to 2050, so this is a long range view of our region and our transportation system and regional quality of life issues. So that's the sides. We just adopted this in September, actually last week. The components of it remain the same. If you go to the link I'm showing on my screen right now, cdtcmpo.org/NV2050, you will gain access to all of the white papers, which we now term chapters, the executive summary, the financial plan, and additional resources for you as a local government member to learn more. And I will go into what I mean by that as we move along today. But specifically, again, what does New Vision say about land use and what we are advocating for in the long range plan? And remember, this was adopted by our board of elected officials representing all of the cities, the 4 counties, the DOT, CDRPC, major other regional entities, CDTA, and of course some town and village governments as well. So this is a consensus-based document. And what we're saying is that we want to continue urban investment. We want to concentrate development where it makes sense. and we want to do smart land use planning. These are the three primary tenets on the land use side that we really want to strongly advocate for. And what does that mean to you at a local government level? Keeping in mind, these are all scalable to your local context. What happens in the village of Scotia would be different perhaps than what happens in Petersburg. So we want to keep that in mind, that this is all scalable to the context of your community. But where it makes sense, we want to make sure that community development supports transit, that it encourages walking and biking, as we talked about in Todd's presentation, that there's a mix of land uses so that it provides that opportunity to walk to a restaurant from your home or to that coffee shop, or maybe even to your school or a place of work. So we want to think about that. Location efficient housing choices. We want to make sure there are choices in housing, right? Not everybody wants the single family home. As people age, their housing needs might change. When they're younger, their housing needs might be different. We want to make sure there's a mix of those housing choices, but in the right places in your community. Putting them out on the fringe of your community might not be the best choice for everyone. We want to have options in some areas of your communities where you want to increase that density to provide the synergy that you need to support walkability and those local businesses. And we want to also think about protecting through smart land use planning our regional quality of life. So, one of the things that draw people here, we want to maintain. We want to maintain that specific community character, whether you're an urban center, a suburb, or a village. But we also want to make sure that we preserve open space, environmentally sensitive land, and agricultural areas. So in this broad vision of concentrated development, a lot of this is the foundation, really, of our linkage program. This chart kind of breaks out our linkage program projects in the major categories. And as you can see, and this is through 2019, it doesn't include the ones we just funded, the bulk of our linkage program projects have focused on corridor studies, studies that integrate land use and transportation, deal with zoning and design guidelines, town and hamlet center planning, and certainly bicycle and pedestrian planning. And there's been others, but I think the key point here is that this program has really served as the implementation tool of our regional transportation plan, but it's not the only tool that we might have. I think one of the things, and as Todd alluded to, I've also been at CDTC now for more than 20 years, and none of what we have talked about is new. We still have seen the same patterns in the big picture, with some changes at the micro level. I think of a town like Clifton Park, when 20, 30 years ago, they were developing in a manner that was very sprawl oriented, and now they're building a town center. And a very interesting town center at that. Other communities have taken other approaches in their local planning, but there's still a lot of challenges, right? So this list is not meant to be comprehensive, just some food for thought in terms of some of those challenges to why we've had a hard time, not a hard time really, but why it's challenging to change course. We have a home rule state with different ideological priorities in local government, right? So whether it be supporting the tax base, whether it's just a belief system that says, people should be able to do with their land as they desire, there's different reasons why communities plan to different levels. So we're still finding in our region, outside of some of the more developed areas, that planning tends to be reactive. The development proposal comes in and then the local folks say, oh my goodness, never thought of this happening. So it tends to be a little more reactive. We have a push and pull between planning and economic development, again, partly because of the reliance on the tax base to fund local government. So there's always that drive to build more because it increases the tax base, but sometimes it's not done. The development itself is not done in a manner that's maybe consistent with the community vision. We have a lot of communities that have very dated comprehensive plans or very dated zoning regulations. A lot of communities have, even some of our larger ones, like the city of Troy, for example, that they've been updating these things in the last few years. But there's a lot of communities out there who either have never, in some cases, have never had a comprehensive plan, but certainly it may be aged to the point that it needs an update, and certainly the zoning regulations are a key component of that. In terms of the regional context, entities like CDTC, CDRPC, and others, we have a limit to what we can do. We don't have an authority over local planning. And, we can guide, we can suggest, we can provide resources, but we can't require, we can't mandate anything. So it really, limits a little bit how we can organize and plan for the region as a whole. We used to, many years ago, back in the 70s, actually, we had a regional development plan that dealt with and addressed land use issues, but we haven't had that since then. And I'm not advocating that we should or should not have one. But the fact of the matter is, New Visions is about as close to a regional development plan as we have currently. And it's certainly not comprehensive. There's a lot of issues that New Visions does not delve into that impact regional development patterns. And the final thing is certainly the incremental development. We're a slow growth region, as Todd mentioned. If we didn't have immigration, we'd actually be losing population. We're also aging. So, the development is a little more haphazard, it's a little less organized, and as a result, it's harder to plan for large parcels, for larger areas in some parts of the region. So those are just a few basic challenges to planning, and I'm sorry that this slide kind of was off center here, but the point of this slide is the red lines on this map show the areas of the region facing PM peak hour traffic congestion. The thicker the red line, the worse the congestion. So to Todd's point, when he showed earlier that the largest portion of commuters not working in their home county was Rensselaer County, you can see that Hoosick Street is one of our most congested corridors, even more so than the Northway. So, when we think about how we grow and develop and plan, this is how it impacts the transportation system. So when we're thinking about implementing the New Vision's land use vision, I thought today we would have a little bit of discussion. I would encourage you to use the chat function in answer to some of the questions I'll be posing today. It will all get recorded. But the two categories of things to think about here is what can you do at a local government level? What can a community do? And then how can CDTC and other regional agencies like CDRPC, DOT, CDTA, how can we assist? And even the county governments, how can we all assist? So let's think about that. So what can communities do? The two most obvious things, right, are develop local plans and adopt them, and then enacting up-to-date local laws, whether it be zoning, subdivision regulations, street standards, all of these kinds of things. So if you would, name one land use planning challenge, again, using the chat function, that your community is currently facing. We're interested in knowing a little bit more about the areas that you're struggling with, whether that be, oh boy, our zoning code is dated and really could use an update. Our planning board members are not all that familiar with good practice. Our elected officials have a point of view that I'd like to educate them on another way of looking at something. So, insert your answers into the chat function, and we'll collect those at the end of the session and discuss them. The next question to ponder as you're thinking about that one is, has COVID impacted planning in your community? If you've had any immediate experience to what's going on with respect to COVID. I'd like to know that as well. Is there a slowdown in development activity in your community? Have you had to roll back on some of your requirements because maybe the developer is saying that because of the economy and economic conditions, the developer can't do certain things? We'd be interested in knowing that as well. I'm just going to read through a few of the chat responses on the first question. Can we talk about planning and economic development being connected and not frictional? It can be connected, and it should be connected. It's not always connected, and I think that's one of the things that we want to make sure happens. New technologies such as community solar seem to be polarizing for both, with both for and against. Density development and the NIMBY mentality, solar utility development on farmland and vacant farmland, redevelopment of vacant or substandard properties, NIMBYism against appropriately dense development in a city close to transit. We have boards that need to better understand the long-term nature of making changes, adding EV to parking standards, consider the volume of green space, not just area. Those are great answers, thank you. With respect to question 2, lack of infrastructure or resources to have in-person meetings. Human element lost from planning board meeting interactions. Yeah, that's a challenge for everyone right now. And then one more comment, unrealistic thoughts of what can and will happen. So thank you for those thoughts and comments. If you have more, feel free to continue to enter them in the chat function. Because these are important. Another comment, COVID has impacted our community's interest in innovative planning, meaning shared street, like the outdoor dining projects, which is an interesting, the open streets programs have definitely increased interest in planning. So I will move on to, screen froze, you know how this goes. There we go. So how is CDTC currently assisting? The most obvious program we have, again, is that linkage program. We are intending to open that back up this fall. We may have some adjustments to it, which I'll talk about later on in the meeting. We did fund 3 projects this past year in Boston Spa, Manans, and Scotia, which are moving forward. We also have, in partnership with CDRPC, the Community Planning Technical Assistance Program. We are still accepting applications for that, so I encourage you to look at either CDTC or CDRPC's website. There's a lot of resources still there for us to work with you at the local government level on a small scale planning related initiative. So we encourage you to look at the guidelines and consider applying. Right now we're working with Clifton Park, East Greenbush, Glenville, and Westerlo on various types of projects. We also have open a Smart Communities Planning Assistance solicitation. Those are due October 2nd. This kind of gets at some of the technology, land use, green community sort of project types. Again, we would encourage you to submit for that. We also have capacity to fund 1 more Complete Streets workshop. We did fund 2, one in Boston Spa and one in Schenectady County. But we do have a capacity for 1 more. So if your community is interested in hosting or having a Complete Streets workshop, I would encourage you to apply for that. We also have capacity for 1 more small scale ADA self-evaluation and transition plan. We did fund 2 in Saratoga Springs and Glenville, but I think if we have a small one from a smaller suburban town or more rural village, we probably wouldn't have the capacity to do something in the city of Albany just because of the scale. But you can reach out to us to get more information on that. Other things we have going on, the Complete Streets Guidebook, we've been talking about it for a long time. It's still in development, and I feel that we'll be closer to be able to share something with you folks at the end of this calendar year or early in 2021. The Open Streets resource page is now up on our website, which contains a lot of information about not only Open Streets programs for dining, but expands the thinking to transportation and providing bicycle and pedestrian spaces for social distancing. And then we have obviously training programs available. So with all those things in mind, and those are some of the things that we have available to you now, my final question to the group is, what does your community need to better plan for its future? We always hear from smaller communities funding to support the local match requirement is a challenge, but beyond that, I'm more interested in hearing from you. Is there any specific area that you really need some help with that you're not able to find the resources for now? Whether that be some guidance on model zoning ordinances. Are there development checklists that you don't have access to that maybe we can prepare or, learn from other communities that have them already? Are there data needs? Todd mentioned the trails and where those are located in addition to the sidewalks. Would data portals be of use to you? Are there other training needs for your local government planning boards, for your elected officials? What more can we do? And if you have any specific ideas, I would encourage you to put those in the chat as well. Some things that I think CDTC is thinking about in terms of what we're seeing regionally is parking policies. Parking policies continue to be a challenge in this region. We are still utilizing a large amount of space for parking cars, and I think that became very clear during the COVID crisis when we have entire office buildings like my own with hundreds of parking spaces that now contain about 35 cars a day. So there's way too much parking, and depending on what happens in the future with work from home, I suspect that we are way overbuilt in parking. So one topic area that we think there's a possibility for maybe this planner forum to work on, maybe a development of a regional parking policy guide. We're thinking about facilitating a regional conversation about parking as it relates to transportation demand management. We could work with local governments to conduct parking inventories. There's truck parking challenges in some parts of the region, and we can work with you to help with that. And also within your local ordinances, creating parking maximums rather than minimums, and there's more guidance needed there. Another area and theme that we continue to see is the desire for the multimodal transportation system and the development of transit, bicycle, and pedestrian policies. One of the things that I think we'll be working with CDTA on at CDTC is the direct development of a transit access toolkit, which I think this working group, this forum could really help inform. And that would, give us a sense of how to design our transit stops. What are the pieces that need to be included in local code to ensure that, transit stops are well served by walking facilities, maybe biking facilities, and other amenities. We want to certainly communicate the land use impacts on transit and vice versa. Supporting that transit-oriented development, and again, providing the training and resources to everyone in the region, as we've done in the past. I'm planning for bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, as well as maintaining it, because now we're at a point in our region where we have trails and sidewalks as well that are aged and need to be replaced. So what are the maintenance policies and how to approach that? Some other areas related to the land use that I teased out of New Visions relate to transportation system safety. Safety overlaps everything. And I think there are tools that can help encourage land use planning that support safety, making sure your local ordinances discuss access management. There are lots of zoning best practices that can support safety. You can use safety as the hook to support bicycle and pedestrian planning because they're our most vulnerable roadway users in many cases. And some other things to think about in the longer term, we have our zero emission vehicle infrastructure plan and working with communities to implement that. And we also have to start thinking about connected and automated vehicles. Whether they're 10 years down the road or beyond, these will have an impact on our transportation system. So how do we begin thinking about that? Some other topics, again, model ordinances related to transportation demand management, freight, other topics. How can we encourage housing for older adults or other populations with mobility limitations to locate on transit routes? Are there other ways we can coordinate in any way regional land use policy? And what about tools like generic environmental impact statements to help finance infrastructure? Town of Colony, now the town of Malta and others have been using the GEIS approach very successfully. Can that model be embraced by other communities to help to finance infrastructure needs? Again, promoting regional solutions in economic development so that we're blending and merging the planning and economic development so they're not working at cross purposes. I mentioned developing the guidelines for CAV, and then smart corridors, which include improvements to signal systems, transit, mobility services like bike share, car share, and how do we integrate mobility hubs into land use planning? And so that's sort of the big picture of where, what New Vision says. There's a lot there. I think, if you have specific thoughts, again, in terms of what your local government and local community need, that would be great. If there's resources that we can assist with beyond some of the things that I already mentioned, we're open to considering them. I think the areas of parking, multimodalism, and perhaps developing some model ordinances will likely be the way to go. But if you have other thoughts, I will stop sharing my screen so that we can have some more discussion about that. So any questions about that piece of today's presentation? I see one comment in the chat pod. Model ordinances would be good to do incremental changes to code. Small communities don't have the resources to do a new comprehensive plan and or a total zoning update. Mark is saying big proponent of the GIS comprehensive plan approach. Any other thoughts or needs in your communities or areas of planning that you're seeing? Okay. Well, hearing none, I will, we will be bringing back in December a specific task list that this working group can help assist with. I'll coordinate this with CDTC staff, CDRPC, and some of our other regional partners so that we can have a clear idea of what specific types of model ordinances this group would be interested in and how we can pull together the language to do that. So stay tuned on that. And then to kind of wrap up today, I will share my screen one more time just to run through the remaining part of the agenda. I already mentioned all of these solicitations that are either opening or are currently open. So again, I would encourage you to check out CDTC's website. The trail feasibility study solicitation, the application deadline has passed. They are currently being reviewed, and a recommendation will be made by CDTC's planning committee at its October meeting. So stay tuned on that. With respect to, not cooperating today for some reason. Some other planning updates from CDTC, trail feasibility study I already mentioned. The Route 7 freight and land use study, this is a specific project out in towns of Dwaynesburg and Rotterdam, looking at the I-88 Route 7 area and the relationship between freight and goods movement and land use there. So it'll be an interesting study to learn from in terms of the freight issues that sometimes we, as planners, are not always on the forefront of our thinking. And I think what we have seen with the work from home and the COVID crisis is freight and goods movement is very high, particularly when you think about companies like an Amazon doing home delivery. Has really increased and changed how we use our curb space and our communities, how goods are moved around. So I think that this will be an interesting study for us to learn from. Another planning study that is about to begin is a local bridge preservation study. We'll be looking at aged bridges in the region, or at least the condition of bridges in the region. And identifying a list of priority locations for some kind of preservation treatments. Some other efforts going on in the region. New York State Department of Transportation has issued a request for proposals for the New York 378 bridge study. PEL stands for Planning and Environmental Linkage. So this is a major planning study to evaluate either the rehab or reconstruction of the Route 378 bridge, which goes between Albany and Albany and Rensselaer counties over the Hudson River. This study will be, similar to a linkage study. It's a pre-NEPA effort, and what it's intending to do is take a whole range of options and narrowing it down through some criteria to maybe 2-3 options to carry forward into a much more detailed scoping and design process for the future of that bridge. And if you're familiar with that area, that bridge serves as a primary access to not only the South Troy, but Hudson Valley Community College. So it's a major effort that we'll be tracking through this group because it does have regional implications on both sides of the river that we'll stay tuned on. And also CDTC and CDTA will be launching a bus lane transit priority feasibility study. We're still finalizing the scope of work on that. This will be another regional effort in which we look at different transit lines throughout the region and the possibility of installing bus lanes or other priority treatments with a goal really of improving the efficiency of the service and the reliability of the service for transit riders. So we're hoping that as part of that project, we might have a demonstration project. We'll see if that can work out. And from a training workshop perspective, the New York Upstate Chapter of the American Planning Association is having its virtual conference September 16th through September 19th. If you go to the New York Upstate Chapter's website, we'll post that in the chat pod. You can get information on what the sessions are all about and how to register. There's also the EV Readiness Workshop, which I did forward the flyer and information to you next week, September 16th and 17th. That's specific to local governments interested in learning more about how to prepare for electric vehicles. CDRPC continues its planning and zoning webinar series. We just had co-hosted with them an Open Streets webinar, the recording of which is available on the Open Streets resources page on our website. And finally, you know, again, I encourage you to look at both CDTC and CDRPC websites for additional information on any upcoming activities. And with that, that's all I had today. Did anybody else have any planning related topics that they would like to raise or ask questions about today? Okay, hearing none. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, December 17th, 9:30 a.m. We will likely still be virtual. If something changes on that, we will certainly let you know. Save the date, December 17th. I think the focus of our next meeting will be on identifying the projects, if you will, that this group will assist with. And we also intend to have some presentations on planning and equity here in the capital region. I think that's an emerging topic that we need to be thinking more about, even based off the demographics and the mapping that Todd shared. So with that, if there's no other questions or comments, thank you for participating today. And we will see you again in December. And one final thing, I will put a note in the chat pod as well to check out CDTC's new learning opportunities with New Visions. We have a training program that we're developing that we can bring to your community. There's a registration form on the website if you're interested in having a presentation to your local town board, village board, city council, planning board, whomever, on one other aspect of New Visions you'd like. So I encourage you to just check that out, as well as we're starting a webinar series about New Vision specifically. So there are some topics coming in October that you might be interested in. And with that, I think that's all I had to share today. Thank you again, and we'll see you all in December. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy.